Have you ever tasted spring? I'm serious, I know you've heard it in the bird songs. You've felt it in the warmer breezes. You've even smelled it in the intoxicating scent of those wonderful wildflowers that all come alive. But have you gotten to taste it? Well, today I'm going to share with you a simple and easy recipe. Easy except that it might take you a few hours picking a little bit of clover out in the yard. I want to share my favorite springtime recipe, which is white clover pudding. If you haven't tasted it, I want you to this week. So stick around in the next few minutes. I'm going to take you out into my yard where earlier today I picked a whole bunch of clover and I made a batch just for you. And we're going to taste it here in just a few minutes. But first, let me show you how we got it done. Before we get into this recipe, which my mouth is watering thinking about already, I want to tell you just a little bit about the amazing properties of white clover. The official name, I believe, is something like Trifolia repens. And white clover, one of the things I like best about it is that it's one of the forageables you will find that has high protein. If you remember us talking about before, there is a distinct need in your diet for protein, and if you were trying to fend for your own self out in the wild, you would be very desperate for protein very quickly unless you knew what to look for. Obviously, meat is going to be the best source, but remember every forageable you can learn that is high in protein, and white clover is one of them. Since every part of the clover is edible, I want to tell you just a few of the recipes that you can make with this. We're only going to make one today completely and taste test it, and it's one of my favorites, so I already know it will be a winner. But I even wrote them down. I wanted to share just a few of the recipes that I know of and that I have made before. Not every single one of these, but I'm going to put the recipes over on PREPSTEADERS.com, so make sure you pop over there to see the full recipes if you really get excited about clover. Some of the recipes you can make, just a few. Obviously, white clover pudding or red clover pudding. You can make iced tea or a wonderful hot tea. Many people drink that. It's an anti-anxiety type of a tea. It helps with menopause, I have heard. It's just a wonderful hot tea to make. They make, obviously, wildflower jelly using only clover, and that's a big success in a lot of folks' cupboard. You can make it fresh into salads. Just put it in whatever salad you're making. Throw some clover in there. Not only the green leaves, but also the little white heads. Infused honey. Now, clover infused honey, if you remember, you can probably get wild clover honey in your area. Most of us can. If you can't, you can just infuse regular honey with clover if you would like to do that. And in places like Alaska where they don't have a whole lot of bees, there's something called Alaskan honey that doesn't really have any bee honey in it at all, but it is made with clover, sort of like a simple syrup with red clover and white clover and some different things. I'll put the recipe over on my website so that you can check that out. But I love this. You can make kombucha. You could make even mead with it. You can make chia or bread pudding incorporating the clover into it. I'll just start back and say last night at midnight while you were asleep, I was out here picking clover in the dark. And then I washed it. I spread it over the trays on my dehydrator. I put it on the very lowest setting because I don't want the heat to break down the nutrition content of it as much as I can possibly help. You're going to let that go all night long. About 10 hours should be enough. But this morning I woke up with this beautiful product of dried clover heads that now I can grind into flour. Of course, right now, while we have electricity, it's a wonderful time to do it the easy way, and that is with something like a typical coffee grinder. If you're going to use a coffee grinder like this, obviously it plugs in, so it has power. I'm going to set it on the very, very finest setting. That's the espresso on this one, so it's going to get it as close to flour consistency, very, very, very fine when it grinds this up. And you could absolutely use this. Now, if you happen to use your coffee grinder for coffee and you just rinse it out and then use it for this, you're still going to have clover flower that tastes a little bit like coffee. I just want to tell you that from personal experience. Okay, another option though that I think all of us should have in our pantries is one of these manual coffee grinders. In fact, you could get a couple of them. I would recommend it because you could use one for coffee in a power outage situation, but you could also use these or have a second one that you just use for herbs. It's wonderful because it has this manual handle that comes off. You can carry it in your backpack pretty easily if you're out in the wild, but it has this wonderful removable cup that's going to catch all of that flour down in the base. For this recipe that we're making today, we do not need flour, but I want you to know how to make white clover flour so you can make cookies or any of the recipes that you might see over on my website that I'm going to post over there. But get yourself one of these manual grinders if you don't have one already. Now let's get into white clover pudding. I'm excited to share with you this recipe, and I want you to already be thinking how you can easily tweak it just a little bit and have it still be successful for you. But the first thing you're going to want to do is pick 3 cups at least of clover heads. Now, let me tell you, you can use white clover or red clover or wood sorrel, which has a really lemony, bright taste to it, or wild honeysuckle. But pick 3 cups worth. They'll be all fluffy. I don't need you to have 3 cups all smashed down or anything like that. But once you've got those, you're going to just quickly go through them. And I don't worry too much about this, but I do tear off the stems and I do tear off any of that little brown stuff that's around the bottom as best as I can. It's a pretty easy little pinch, and so I usually just take and throw that out, and I'm trying my best to pinch most of the lovely little whiteness that is fresh into a bowl. And we'll use this red bowl for that. You're going to just put however much it comes to into that bowl. And once we get those in there, we're going to rinse them off before we use them for the recipe. Let me say this, the earlier in the morning you can pick them, the better. They're somehow sweeter and fresher and more vibrant. And also, you're going to want to pick the biggest, fattest heads. In clover world, fatter the better, okay? So get the biggest plump white clover heads that you can find, or red clover, either one. And you're going to want to remember this, pick them right before you use them. We've only had these out here about 30 minutes or so, but give it an hour or two and these will already have turned yellow on you. You want to try to use them before that point. If you're making this with the wood sorrel or the wild honeysuckle, you probably don't need to do this. But because the clover is so gentle in taste, I want you to just be aware that one of the things I always add to it, not just as a garnish, but actually in the recipe, is just a little bit of that fresh mint that you might have in your garden. Either fresh mint, or if you have lemon mint or lemon balm, that's what I have here, or lemon verbena even. Any of those are just a wonderful addition to make with just a few of those fresh leaves thrown in for flavor. It kind of ramps up the lemoniness and springiness of the flavor. So if you have some, don't be afraid to get it out and throw some of it right in there with it. So once you have that 3 cups of the clover processed and cleaned and set aside, you're going to also want the other ingredients assembled. And the first one of those is heavy whipping cream. I love this recipe because though today we're able to use fresh, wonderful heavy whipping cream whipped up into those stiff peaks just waiting for the recipe to be used, you could also use powdered heavy whipping cream. I don't know if you've seen that before, but it is available as a shelf-stable item, and it's going to last, I think, up to like 10 years or something in your pantry. So you could use powdered heavy whipping cream for this recipe if you didn't have fresh. Also, the next ingredient that you're going to want is Jell-O. Now, before you tune me out if you're vegan, you could use agar-agar. However, there are pros and cons to that. Agar-agar happens to also be, and I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, forgive me if I am, but it happens to be vegan, and that's wonderful. But to dissolve in what how we heat it up, it has to be at a boiling point, over boiling point, for it to fully dissolve. The problem with that is that when we mix it with the other ingredients, which happen to be fresh orange juice and wild clover honey, it's going to immediately get rid of all of those healing properties and any kind of nutritional content in those, because we've had to boil it so hot just to dissolve that agar, or however you say that. So you have two other options. One of them is an easy one, and that is to just use regular orange Jello. If I was going to use orange Jello, I would absolutely have a shelf-stable item that could be in my Forever Foods pantry, because many people report that it lasts just fine up to 30 years if you get regular Jello with the sugar in it, because it's the sugar that helps preserve it, of all things. So if we made it with orange Jello, just so you know, we would want to heat this up just enough to dissolve with 1 cup of hot water and 1 cup of fresh squeezed navel orange juice. All right? Remember that. Now, if I chose to use the unflavored gelatin, all right, this is what we're using today because I like going as natural as possible. However, this is not shelf stable indefinitely. This will go bad after a few years in your pantry. It does have a long shelf life, but not nearly like 30 years, because there is no sugar in there or preservatives to keep it safe that long. If we use unflavored gelatin like this though, I'm going to use 1 packet of this to 0 amounts of water and 2 full cups of the fresh squeezed orange juice. We're going to stir that all together in a saucepan with the processed 3 cups-ish, almost 3 cups-ish worth of clover heads that we have ready. We're going to put in 4 tablespoons of raw honey, and if you can get it, clover honey would be preferable. Local clover honey that you can find around you that is raw and has not been heated up yet. And we're just going to let that sit and dissolve, and then I like to, before I put it in the refrigerator to start setting up, I like to just let it kind of marinate there for a while. Those clovers are such a mild taste of spring that you're going to want to just get as much of that soaked out as possible. So be patient with it as it just kind of takes its time and soaks up those wonderful tastes of spring before you set it into the refrigerator, just until it sets up. And that's when we get to add that wonderful homemade heavy whipping cream to make a phenomenal, fluffy, delicious taste that you just are going to want to experience for yourself. Now comes the fun part, at least for me. I hope you remember to pop on over to PREPSTEADERS.com, and I'll put the link down below so that you can get over there to the recipe. So just in case I missed any part of it today, it will be put in there so you absolutely can make this for yourself. Now I get to taste what spring tastes like. Oh, it's wonderful. I wish I could describe it to you. It tastes like sweet clover. It is not completely overpowered by the orange. The fresh orange juice tastes fresh, squeezed. I absolutely love this, and we'll devour the entire amount before about 10 minutes has passed. While I enjoy this, will you take the time to share this episode with somebody that you love? Will you also this week go out and find someone who needs you to be their blessing? And will you make it a point to be a blessing to them? Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. I love this word. This is out of the book of 1 Peter, chapter 4, and it's verses 7 through 11. It says this: "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers, and above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Now go spread the word.